I discovered that for 6 months I fell in love with a fake profile created by my own mother, who later confessed to me, "Marina, my love, I don't exist. I never existed as the person you learned to love." The penetrating and bitter smell of iced coffee invaded my nostrils like a sharp blade dipped in ice, while I held my phone with hands violently trembling out of control, each finger convulsing as if it had a life of its own, independent of my will. Each muscle in my arms contracting in an involuntary dance of growing panic that climbed up my spine like static electricity. I was rereading that impossible and terrifying message that had just arrived at exactly 9:40. 3 in the morning of a gray Tuesday in March that had begun like any absolutely normal day of remote work at home, with the same comforting routine as always. Waking up to the alarm clock gently playing a classical melody, preparing coffee using my favorite cloth filter method, checking professional emails while the city awoke outside through my window, overlooking an inner courtyard full of plants that neighbors cultivated with collective care. My 5 years of life seemed to have dissolved into a terrifying and surreal confusion that made my brain flatly refuse to process what was happening before my green eyes, that blinked desperately in a futile attempt to clear a vision that needed to be completely distorted by the chronic lack of sleep of the last few days. Or perhaps by some kind of momentary hallucination caused by the accumulated stress of months working on complex architectural projects that required attention to the smallest details. The apartment around me, with its white walls meticulously decorated with pictures I carefully chose over the years in small galleries and antique markets, light wooden shelves filled with books that brought me intellectual and emotional comfort during lonely nights, plants I cared for with maternal affection, and that responded to my love by growing exuberantly in each strategically illuminated corner, suddenly seemed to belong to a completely strange person, in a parallel universe where nothing made logical sense, and reality had become a liquid and unstable substance that slipped through my trembling fingers like fine sand on a distant beach of my memory. Gabriel Martinez was the man of my most intimate and secret dreams, the Prince Charming who had emerged from the pages of novels I had devoured since adolescence. Or at least that was exactly who I had been led to believe I had met through a sophisticated dating app 6 months ago. When I had finally gathered enough courage to try to find someone special after consecutive years of frustrated relationships and devastating romantic disappointments that left me deeply distrustful and cautious with any man who dared to approach my heart, protected by emotional walls built brick by brick through painful experiences that taught me that vulnerability was synonymous with guaranteed suffering. He was absolutely too perfect to be true. A successful and respected architect of exactly 37 years, living in an elegant penthouse in the most sophisticated neighborhood of São Paulo, possessing a caring and attentive personality that always knew exactly the right words to say at the precise moments to make me genuinely smile, even on my darkest and most difficult days. Demonstrating an infinite and almost supernatural patience to listen patiently to my deepest insecurities about past relationships without ever judging me harshly or trying to rush me into emotional decisions for which I wasn't psychologically prepared, respecting my internal time of healing and growth in a way that no man had previously demonstrated. During these 6 months that now seem to have been an eternity, lived in a parallel universe of illusions carefully constructed by invisible hands and obscure motivations that I couldn't understand, we religiously talked every day for hours and hours through elaborate and affectionate text messages that I reread multiple times, savoring each word like chocolate, slowly melting on the tongue. Long and melodious voice messages that I kept on my phone like precious treasures and replayed in moments of solitude to lull myself with the sound of his deep and comforting voice. And promised video calls that unfortunately always presented mysterious and inexplicable technical problems, exactly at the crucial moment when we were finally going to see each other face to face and breathe the same digital air that would connect our physical worlds separated by the cruel distance of urban space, but which allowed me to hear hundreds of times his deep and seductively enveloping voice that calmed me like a soft and comforting symphony, playing silently in the background of my busy and stressful days at the architecture office, where I had worked as a project coordinator for almost a decade. Each conversation was a deep dive into emotional intimacy that I had never experienced with such overwhelming intensity. He knew me better than I knew my own most secret desires and fears, anticipating my emotional needs with an almost supernatural precision that made me feel truly understood and valued for the first time in adult life. As if I had finally found my predestined soulmate after years of searching in superficial relationships that never touched the deeper layers of my complex personality. Gabriel knew exactly when I was having a difficult day at work without me needing to explain the specific details of everyday frustrations, sending supportive messages that arrived at the perfect moment as if he could read my soul through the invisible waves of the digital universe that connected us through fiber optic cables and telecommunication towers scattered throughout the São Paulo metropolis. He remembered tiny details from old conversations that even I had forgotten in the whirlwind of information that bombards our mind daily, citing things I had mentioned weeks before about my most ambitious professional dreams, my most well-guarded family insecurities, my most intimate and vulnerable romantic hopes, demonstrating a level of genuine attention and care that made me feel like the most important and valued person in the entire world, the only woman who really mattered in the vast ocean of billions of people who inhabit this confused and accelerated planet. This cannot be really happening to me at this moment in my life when I was finally beginning to believe that I deserved to be happy. It must be some kind of elaborate and cruel prank that someone is playing for reasons I cannot imagine. Or perhaps professional hackers specialized in cybercrime have invaded his account to torture me psychologically through methods that I still don't completely understand. I desperately muttered to the absolute and oppressive silence of my apartment that seemed to have absorbed all sounds of urban life outside, literally feeling as if the waxed wooden floor was vertiginously opening beneath my bare feet that touched the cold surface of the kitchen floor where I had stopped completely paralyzed like a pillar of salt. Holding a floral porcelain cup that my maternal grandmother had given me as a birthday present years ago, and that now dangerously trembled in my hand that was crisped like an involuntary claw that refused to relax even when I consciously tried to release the accumulated muscle tension. My fingers, moving with a frenetic urgency that made my joints physically ache as if they had been subjected to strenuous exercises for consecutive hours, typed a completely desperate response that tried to deny with all the strength of my soul the absolutely impossible reality that was unfolding before me like a vivid and detailed nightmare in the harsh and merciless light of the day that had promised to be normal and productive like so many others. The words appeared on the cell phone screen through my vision, blurred by tears that were beginning to form in the corners of my green eyes like small pearls of crystallized pain, each typed letter being an act of desperate resistance against a truth that my rational mind flatly refused to accept as possible in the real world where I believed I lived until a few minutes ago, when existence still made sense, and romantic relationships followed basic rules of honesty and emotional reciprocity. Gabriel, what exactly do you mean with these terrible words that are destroying everything I believed in during the last few months? What kind of perverse and cruel joke are you playing on me right now when I was beginning to plan our future together? You're scaring me deeply in a way I never imagined possible, and I absolutely don't understand anything that's happening. I sent quickly with fingers that trembled so much that I had to rewrite the message 3 consecutive times before being able to form coherent and grammatically correct sentences, desperately hoping with every fiber of my being that it was just some bizarre and inexplicable misunderstanding. Or perhaps he was going through some kind of serious personal crisis or temporary mental collapse that made him speak in a completely strange way, disconnected from the intimate and caring reality that we knew and built together through months of deep conversations and mutual revelations that seemed so genuine and authentic. The apartment around me seemed to be slowly contracting like a giant bellows sucking all available air, the familiar walls painted in soft tones that I had personally chosen inexorably approaching as if they wanted to crush me along with the debris of my mental sanity that was beginning to crack like tempered glass under extreme and constant pressure, creating microscopic fissures that spread in fractal patterns through my ability to process information in a logical and organized manner. But the answer came in less than 2 eternal minutes that passed like torturous hours, measured not by the hands of the clock, but by the accelerated beats of my heart that echoed in my ears like war drums announcing a battle I didn't know how to fight, loaded with a cutting and calculated coldness that pierced my heart like a sharp ice blade plunged directly into the center of my throbbing chest, that contracted in a physical anguish that I didn't know was possible to experience without being physically injured. Marina, my dear and naive Marina, I never existed for real as a physical person in this concrete world where you breathe and walk and dream of futures that can never materialize in the way you imagine. I am just a completely fictional character meticulously created by someone who knows you more intimately than any human being should know another person without your explicit consent. Someone who claimed to want to protect you from hurting yourself again, and repeatedly with real men who supposedly don't deserve you or don't value you adequately, according to your high standards and your complex emotional needs that few can truly understand or satisfy in a genuine and lasting way. I read on the screen that was beginning to blur through the tears that now fell freely down my face like summer rain on a dusty window. Each word of that terrible message was like a brutal and accurate punch to the stomach that completely took the air out of my already breathless lungs, making me literally fold over myself in an involuntary fetal position as I tried to breathe through the growing panic that rose up my throat like bitter and poisonous bile that burned all the way to my mouth, leaving a metallic taste of pure fear that I had never experienced even in my worst nightmares of nocturnal anxiety. The precious and intimate memories of the last 6 months began to pass through my mind like a film at a dizzily accelerated speed projected on a mental screen that fragmented into irregular pieces. All those deep and revealing conversations where I had opened my heart completely and without reservations, exposing every vulnerability like a delicate flower opening to the morning sun. Each poorly healed wound from previous relationships that ended in disillusionment. Each secret dream that I had never shared with any human being before because they were too fragile to be exposed to others' judgment. All the countless times I had cried genuine tears of pure happiness for finally having found someone who understood me, at levels that transcended common verbal communication and touched spiritual dimensions of human connection. I vividly remembered as if it were a film playing in high definition in my tormented mind the detailed plans we had made together for our first in-person meeting, daydreaming about how it would feel to touch his skin that I imagined soft and warmed by the São Paulo sun, to feel his protective embrace surrounding my body in a sensation of security that I hadn't experienced in years, to look directly into his eyes that I had imagined hundreds of times during our frustrated video calls that we never managed to complete due to technical problems that now gained a sinister and deliberate meaning. I had chosen special clothes for occasions that would never happen, dresses that enhanced my best physical attributes without being vulgar, color combinations that complemented my skin tone, delicate accessories that added subtle elegance to the ensemble. I had practiced conversations in the mirror of my bedroom, rehearsing possible topics that might arise during our first moments together in person. I had even bought a new French perfume specifically to impress him when we would finally be face-to-face, breathing the same air charged with romantic expectations and infinite possibilities of growing intimacy. All of this now revealed itself as a pathetic and one-sided fantasy, a cruel theater where I was the only sincere actress playing a real role while pouring genuine emotions onto an empty stage, while my supposed romantic partner was an illusion completely fabricated by motivations that I still couldn't understand or accept as possible within the spectrum of normal human behaviors. Who the hell is behind this elaborate and sadistic farce that consumed half a year of my adult life? Who in the world would be capable of such meticulously planned and psychologically devastating cruelty against someone who never did harm to anyone? I screamed at the silent walls of the apartment, my voice echoing through the empty space that suddenly seemed larger and colder than ever, as if the physical dimensions of the environment had expanded to accommodate the magnitude of my emotional pain, while hot and salty tears began to flow uncontrollably down my face without me being able or wanting to control them. Each drop being a small physical manifestation of the emotional pain that grew exponentially in my chest like an open wound exposed to the corrosive salt of the deepest betrayal a person can experience. The third message arrived like a final demolishing hammer, systematically and mercilessly destroying any microscopic vestige of hope that I might still be desperately clinging to, that this was some kind of terrible and temporary misunderstanding that could be clarified with a simple, rational explanation or an enlightening phone call that would restore my sanity and my world to their familiar and safe places, where the laws of emotional physics made sense, and mothers did not torture daughters through elaborate schemes of psychological manipulation. The words appeared on the cell phone screen like emotional death sentences pronounced by an invisible and implacable judge, each character being a precise stab in what remained of my already shattered heart, in irregular fragments that cut my soul with each accelerated heartbeat. Who created Gabriel Martinez from scratch, building every aspect of his personality like a meticulous sculptor molding malleable clay, was your mother, Solange Maria Santos Silva. She used carefully selected photographs of a Brazilian professional model that she found by methodically browsing social media during weeks of obsessive research, created a complex and completely fictional personality based obsessively on everything she knows about your most intimate personal tastes, your most secret romantic preferences that you shared during seemingly innocent family conversations, your expressed and unexpressed desires about ideal relationships, and spent exactly 6 months and 11 days meticulously portraying the absolutely perfect man for you, studying each of your reactions like a behavioral scientist to continuously perfect the performance that kept you emotionally captive without suspecting anything. The physical world around me began to spin at an impossible and nauseating speed. The vibrant colors of the apartment, the soft blue of the curtains, the green of the plants I cared for lovingly, the golden yellow of filtered sunlight, mixing into a kaleidoscopic and strange confusion that made me desperately grab the cold marble kitchen counter to avoid completely collapsing on the polished wooden floor, like a rag doll abandoned by a child who grew tired of playing. The marble under my palms was as cold as Antarctic ice, its smooth surface brutally contrasting with the roughness of the reality that had just hit me like an emotional tsunami destroying everything in its path. My mother Solange, the 62-year-old woman who had always relentlessly criticized my love life with acidic comments disguised as maternal concern and unsolicited advice delivered with condescending smiles, who always said in a professorial tone that I was excessively demanding and perfectionist with the men I met, who always dramatically warned me that I would never find someone truly compatible if I continued being so selective and difficult to please romantically, had meticulously created and orchestrated a completely false and fabricated relationship to manipulate me in a way that I could never have imagined or anticipated, even in my most bizarre and disturbing nightmares that visited my occasional sleepless nights. During all these precious and intense months, when I called her practically vibrating with happiness and excitement to tell her in detail about Gabriel, about how I was genuinely happy and deeply in love for the first time in years of frustrating relationships, she listened attentively on the other end of the line, pretending sincere maternal interest and offering seemingly wise advice based on decades of life experience, while secretly knowing that she was personally orchestrating every moment of my artificial joy and completely illusory passion like a film director manipulating actors who don't know they're being filmed. Why would she do this to me when I always completely trusted her and shared every aspect of my intimate life? What kind of mother would be capable of deliberately playing with her own daughter's deepest and most vulnerable feelings in this absolutely sick and cruel way that violates all the unwritten laws of maternal love? I asked aloud to the oppressive void that surrounded me like a toxic cloud, feeling an explosive mixture of volcanic anger and abyssal despair that made me want to scream until my voice completely disappeared from my raw throat, until my lungs emptied of all air and my existence dissolved into nothingness, like smoke dispersing in the cold morning wind. The apartment that had always been my sacred and safe refuge, my personal castle against the storms of the outside world, now seemed like a psychological horror film set directed by a maestro of cruelty, with each familiar piece of furniture transforming into a silent witness to my pathetic naivety and the elaborate manipulation that had consumed half a year of my adult life like an emotional parasite sucking my ability to trust in genuine human relationships. The armchair where I used to curl up to read romance novels dreaming of true love now looked at me with what seemed to be contempt for my stupidity. The dining table where I had imagined serving romantic meals to Gabriel now stood like a sacrificial altar where my sanity had been offered to the gods of family manipulation. Each decorative object that I had lovingly chosen to create a welcoming environment now seemed to be silently laughing at my inability to realize that I was being deceived by the person who supposedly loved me more than anything in the world. The following messages continued to arrive in a devastating and relentless sequence that explained increasingly horrifying details about how Solange had meticulously planned everything for months or possibly years, obsessively studying male profiles on social media like an academic researcher obsessed with a project that consumed all her thoughts and energy, analyzing photographs with a magnifying glass to find the perfect face that would be irresistible to my specific personality, and my particular romantic traumas cataloged through years of family conversations that I thought were normal moments of connection between mother and daughter. Each revelation was like an additional layer of betrayal being peeled away with surgical precision, exposing increasingly deeper levels of psychological manipulation that demonstrated an intimate and disturbing knowledge of my most secret desires and my best-guarded vulnerabilities, information that only an observant and apparently caring mother could have collected over decades of seemingly normal family life. She had systematically cataloged every complaint I made about past relationships during our weekly phone conversations, every romantic dream I timidly expressed during our Sunday walks in the park, every characteristic I mentioned valuing in an ideal partner when we watched romantic movies together and I commented on the heartthrobs on screen, transforming this personal and vulnerable information into sharp psychological weapons that were used to build the perfect emotional trap into which I had completely and unsuspectingly fallen, like a naive bird flying straight into a golden cage. How did she gain access to such specific and detailed information about my previous relationships, about intimate conversations I had with other men? How long had she been planning this terrible manipulation, collecting data about my emotional life like a spy infiltrated in my own family? I whispered to my distorted reflection on the dark screen of my cell phone, realizing with growing horror that my privacy had been violated in ways I didn't even know were possible within the family dynamics I considered normal and healthy, but which now revealed itself as a behavioral observation laboratory where I was the experimental rat being studied without knowledge or consent. Your mother spent entire weeks meticulously studying your previous relationships, as if she were an academic researcher obsessed with a doctoral project on emotional manipulation. Analyzing with scientific precision what had gone wrong with each boyfriend you've had since adolescence, cataloging every petty fight, every romantic disappointment that left you crying alone in your room, every moment of romantic frustration that you shared with her during seemingly innocent family conversations that she secretly used as meticulous behavioral data collection sessions, and created Gabriel as the absolutely perfect version of everything you've always desperately sought in a man, but never managed to find in the concrete and imperfect reality of genuine human relationships, where real people have flaws, insecurities, and limitations that prevent the fantastical perfection that only exists in romantic dreams fueled by decades of literature and cinema that teach us unrealistic expectations about true love, continued the devastating confession that systematically destroyed every good and precious memory I had of the last 6 months, transforming each moment of sincere joy into evidence of my own pathetic naivety and my fundamental inability to distinguish between genuine affection and sophisticated manipulation. The apartment around me, which moments before was my personal sanctuary full of objects and memories that brought me comfort and emotional security, now seemed like a macabre museum of my own stupidity, where each book carefully organized on the shelves became a silent testimony to my education that apparently didn't serve me to detect elaborate lies. Each painting on the wall transformed into a window to a world where I was constantly observed without knowing. Each smiling photo on my desk screamed about my inability to perceive that I was being easily manipulated by someone who should unconditionally protect me from any form of harm or psychological suffering. Gabriel didn't like football because I had always bitterly complained for years that my ex-boyfriends were obsessively addicted to sports that they considered more important than our romantic life, and our need to build emotional intimacy through deep conversations and shared activities that would strengthen our connection as a couple. He fervently adored classical literature because I always nostalgically mentioned during our Sunday walks how romantic and intellectually stimulating it would be to date someone who shared my passion for books and could discuss with me the emotional nuances of great literary works during cozy rainy afternoons in small, intimate cafes, creating intellectual memories that would last decades. He demonstrated infinite and almost supernatural patience for long and deep conversations, because I always repeatedly complained about men who didn't know how to adequately communicate about complex feelings, or who visibly became bored when I tried to share my most intimate and elaborate thoughts about life, relationships, and future dreams that involved building something lasting and meaningful together with someone special. Each seemingly authentic characteristic of his personality had been carefully and methodically constructed like a complex 1,000-piece puzzle based on my previous romantic frustrations and my expressed and unexpressed desires about ideal relationships that I had naively shared with the person who would become my most refined and cruel psychological torturer, using intimate information against me in a way that violated all basic expectations about familial love and maternal protection. She even extensively researched architecture on specialized websites, technical forums frequented by professionals in the field, and free online courses offered by prestigious universities to be able to sustain convincing and technically precise conversations about his fictitious profession, demonstrating specific knowledge about architectural styles, construction materials, and professional challenges that only someone truly from the field would know, and created elaborate and emotionally moving stories about his traumatic childhood and dysfunctional family, strategically based on things she knew would touch me emotionally, and make me feel protective compassion for wounded people who needed love and understanding to heal from past traumas. Revealed one of the subsequent messages that arrived like subsequent blows in a relentless sequence of devastating revelations that made me question my basic ability to perceive the reality around me. Each word was an additional discovery about the abyssal depth of manipulation that had been orchestrated against me with surgical precision, demonstrating a level of meticulous planning and sick dedication to lying that transcended anything I could consider humanly possible or psychologically normal within the spectrum of maternal behaviors known to modern psychology. I felt real and violent nausea rising inexorably up my constricted throat as I realized that every intimate moment I believed had been genuine and spontaneous. Every personal secret I had shared with Gabriel, thinking I was building solid foundations for a lasting relationship based on mutual trust and shared vulnerability. Every emotional vulnerability I had shown, believing I was being seen and loved for who I truly was without masks or pretenses, had been carefully absorbed and cataloged by my own mother for future use in her cruel and elaborate manipulation that kept me an emotional prisoner without my knowledge. The apartment around me seemed to be physically shrinking at a perceptible speed. The familiar walls, painted in colors I had chosen to create a peaceful environment, slowly approaching as if they wanted to crush me along with the wreckage of my shattered reality and my apparently permanently damaged ability to trust any future human relationship, whether romantic, familial, or platonic. Each piece of furniture I had lovingly selected over the years, each decorative object I had bought in happy moments of decorating my personal space, each plant I carefully tended to as if they were green children who depended on my love to survive. All of this seemed to be watching me with invisible eyes that judged my pathetic naivety and my fundamental inability to perceive that I was being systematically manipulated by the person who supposedly loved me more than anything in the world and who should have been my greatest protector against life's cruelties. How will I ever trust anyone again, after discovering that not even my own mother is capable of basic honesty and respect for my deepest and most vulnerable feelings? I whispered to my distorted reflection in the black screen of my cell phone that had temporarily stopped receiving the devastating messages, my voice coming out weaker and more broken than I had ever heard leaving my own throat, as if my vocal cords had been damaged by the emotional impact I had just suffered. During the 2 hours that followed that devastating revelation that forever changed my perception of family, love, and human trust, I remained seated on the cold kitchen floor, leaning against the cabinet under the sink where I kept cleaning products that now seemed inadequate to clean the emotional mess that had invaded my life, obsessively rereading all the conversations I had with Gabriel during the last 6 months, desperately looking for signs I should have noticed. Subtle clues that could have alerted me to the elaborate farce that was being performed in the cruel theater of my emotional life, without me knowing that I was simultaneously actress and audience in a play where all other characters were fake. It was like being a detective investigating my own broken heart, searching for evidence of an emotional crime that had been committed against my ability to love and trust other people, analyzing each affectionate message, each sweet word, each promise of a future, as if they were clues left by a criminal who had stolen 6 months of my emotional life. Each affectionate message he had sent now sounded false and calculated in a terrible rereading, each sweet word transforming into a lie that burned like sulfuric acid in my throat, dried by anxiety. Each promise of future meetings revealing themselves as deliberate stratagems to keep my hope alive without ever allowing reality to expose the farce. The photos he had shared with me, always very few and with strangely professional quality for casual selfies from someone who claimed not to like being photographed, now made perfect sense as images stolen from some unknown model who never knew he was being used to break the heart of an innocent woman in São Paulo who dreamed of true love. How could I be so naive and blind to signs that now seem obvious? How did I not realize that something was fundamentally wrong when he always had convenient and elaborate excuses for not meeting in person? I tortured myself mentally, remembering all the times we had scheduled meetings that were canceled at the last minute due to suspiciously opportune work emergencies, sudden family problems that always arose on the eve of our plans, unexpected business trips that appeared exactly when we were finally going to meet face-to-face. Solange always knew my detailed schedule because I shared my plans with her as any daughter does with a seemingly interested mother, always knew when I was free for romantic encounters, and could easily create narrative conflicts for Gabriel that would prevent any possibility of a real meeting that would immediately expose the farce and destroy months of meticulous psychological work. My mother had played with me as if I were a doll in an elaborate playhouse, manipulating every aspect of my emotional life with a refined cruelty that I didn't know existed in the human heart, especially in the heart of someone who supposedly loved me unconditionally from the moment I was born and who should have been my foundation of emotional security in the world. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was familial, maternal, existential at a depth that threatened my basic ability to trust in reality, perceived through my senses and my emotional intuition that had spectacularly failed to detect the most elaborate manipulation of my adult life. The decision to confront Solange directly arose from the anger burning in my chest, like volcanic lava pressing against the walls of a volcano about to explode. An inverted maternal fury that gave me supernatural strength to get up from the floor where I had remained for hours, processing the destruction of my reality, and drive to her house at a speed that probably violated several traffic laws, but perfectly reflected the internal chaos that dominated every rational thought and every uncontrolled emotion passing through my nervous system like short-circuiting electricity. During the 25 minutes of traffic through the city center, navigating the familiar streets that now seemed to belong to a parallel universe, where the basic rules of human decency did not apply, I mentally rehearsed 1,000 different ways to approach the situation, violently oscillating between screaming like a madwoman possessed by righteous fury and trying to maintain some dignity during the most important confrontation of my adult life, the moment when I would finally face the person who had raised me, and then betrayed me in the most elaborate and cruel way possible. The familiar streets of childhood seemed strange and distorted, as if I were seeing everything through a filter that changed colors and shapes, transforming comfortable memories of Sunday walks and innocent games into alien landscapes that offered no comfort or emotional recognition. The bakery where Solange used to take me to buy sweet bread on Sundays now looked like a film noir setting. The park where I learned to ride a bicycle under her encouraging shouts now stood like a cemetery of memories that had been contaminated by the discovery of her capacity for sophisticated psychological manipulation. The house where I had grown up, a light blue 2-story home with a well-kept garden that always brought me instant peace in difficult moments of adolescence and youth, now seemed like the residence of a dangerous stranger who had invaded my life, using sophisticated psychological tricks that I didn't even know existed in the arsenal of possible human behaviors. I parked the car on the sidewalk in a crooked and careless manner, exiting the vehicle with a fierce determination that surprised me, considering that my entire life had just completely collapsed on an ordinary Tuesday morning that had begun with coffee and normal expectations of professional productivity. My feet touched the uneven cobblestone ground of the street where I had played hopscotch during childhood, but now each stone seemed to be judging my naivety and my inability to perceive that I had been observed and studied like a lab rat for decades of my seemingly normal family life. Solange will explain to me every detail of this sick farce, every moment of planning, every cruel decision that led her to destroy my ability to trust in love. Or I'll call the police and sue her for whatever crime applies to this type of psychological manipulation that must have a technical name in modern penal codes. I muttered through clenched teeth as I walked through the garden she tended with such pride, purposely stepping on the flowers that had always been her maternal passion, transferred to beings that couldn't question her methods of care, in a small act of rebellion that gave me a dark and petty satisfaction that contrasted with the overwhelming pain dominating my chest. The sound of the doorbell echoing inside the house brought back thousands of childhood memories. Summer afternoons running through the corridors, Sunday mornings sleeping late in rooms that smelled of lavender, Christmas nights decorating trees while she sang holiday songs with a sweet voice that now revealed itself capable of elaborate lies. But all these memories were now contaminated by suspicion about how many other lies Solange had told over the years, how many aspects of my personality she had subtly manipulated, how many important decisions in my life had been influenced by seemingly casual suggestions that were actually part of a larger plan of obsessive maternal control. Solange opened the door, wearing her favorite blue silk robe that I had given her as a gift on the last Mother's Day, and slippers with pink pom-poms that made soft little noises when she walked around the house, displaying the same warm maternal smile that had always welcomed me since I was a small child running into her arms after difficult days at school, as if she hadn't just completely destroyed my ability to trust in human relationships through a manipulation that took 6 meticulous months to execute with psychological perfection. Her gray hair was tied in a messy bun that left some loose strands framing her face that I had always considered beautiful and trustworthy. Her blue eyes shone with an apparent joy that made me feel violent nausea, because I recognized in them the same expression she made when she managed to convince me of something for my own good, and her voice had the same sweet and welcoming tone as always when she said with frightening naturalness, "Dear daughter, what a nice surprise in the middle of the week. Come in quickly. I just made fresh coffee the way you like it, with that special cinnamon you've loved since you were little." It was exactly how an experienced sociopath would act, maintaining the facade of maternal normality, even knowing that her victim had discovered the truth about her psychological crimes, using the same caring tone of voice that always worked to disarm my resistance when I was a child and questioned her authoritarian decisions. I entered the house without responding to the warm greeting, my feet moving automatically through familiar corridors while my mind processed the surreality of the situation, walking directly to the living room where I had spent so many childhood afternoons playing with dolls and talking about future dreams, but which now seemed like the setting of a psychological horror film where the villain was the person who should protect me from any harm and who knew each of my vulnerabilities because she had observed them grow and develop over decades of apparently loving family coexistence. Solange, I said, using her proper name instead of mother, on my voice coming out colder and more controlled than I expected, as if a part of my personality had emotionally disconnected to protect me from the full impact of the confrontation that was about to happen. We need to talk urgently about Gabriel Martinez and about all the psychological theater you orchestrated against me during the last 6 months of my life. The change in her expression was instantaneous and revealing like an open book. The maternal smile disappeared as if it had been erased by a magic eraser. Her blue eyes widened in a mixture of genuine surprise and poorly disguised panic that she tried to control but which leaked through the micro-expressions she couldn't completely camouflage. And her hands began to tremble slightly while she tried to maintain composure in the face of the confrontation she clearly didn't expect to happen so soon or in such a direct and accusatory manner. For a few seconds that seemed like an eternity suspended in time, we stared at each other in tense silence that echoed through the familiar room. Two women who shared DNA and decades of family history, but who at that moment were complete strangers, separated by an abyss of betrayal that perhaps could never be crossed again, looking at each other across an emotional distance that had become greater than entire continents. The antique clock on the wall continued its hypnotic tick-tock, marking the seconds of a confrontation that would forever define the nature of our family relationship, while the air conditioner whispered softly in the background, creating an ironically peaceful soundtrack for what promised to be the most devastating conversation of our lives. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear daughter. Who is this Gabriel Martinez you mentioned?" Solange tried, but her trembling voice and the way she avoided my direct gaze completely gave away that she knew exactly what I was talking about, using the same tone of forced innocence she used when I was a teenager, and she tried to deny having gone through my things, or when she lied about forgetting to pick me up from school so she could meet some boyfriend she kept secret. It was a familiar performance that I had known since childhood, but which now took on sinister dimensions, considering the magnitude of the lie she had orchestrated. "Don't treat me like an idiot, Solange. I know exactly what you did during these 6 months. I know you created a fake profile. I know you spent half a year pretending to be a man to deceive me. And I want to know exactly why you did this to me. What kind of mental illness led you to play with my feelings in this absolutely cruel and calculated way?" I finally exploded, my voice echoing through the walls of the familiar room that now seemed like a courtroom where I was simultaneously prosecutor, judge, and victim of a crime I didn't even know could exist within family dynamics. Solange let herself fall heavily into the floral armchair that had always been her favorite place to watch soap operas and judge the love lives of the characters with sarcastic comments, her hands covering her face in a theatrical display of despair that could be genuine or just another layer of manipulation she had perfected over decades of subtle control over my emotional life. "Marina, my daughter, you need to understand that I did this out of true love and genuine maternal concern. You were so sad, so desperate to find someone who would adequately value you, and I couldn't bear to see my only daughter suffering repeatedly because of men who don't deserve you or who can't recognize the special woman you are," she said through the fingers that partially covered her face, as if confessing a venial sin instead of admitting to having committed one of the cruelest acts a mother could inflict on a daughter who completely trusted her. The word love coming from her mouth in that context sounded like a blasphemy that made me feel such intense anger that my hands involuntarily closed into tight fists, nails digging into my palms in physical pain that was preferable to the emotional pain dominating my chest, like a malignant tumor growing exponentially. True love doesn't involve elaborate lying, sophisticated psychological manipulation, and deliberately breaking the heart of the loved one through a farce that lasted half a year of my adult life, I shouted, feeling hot tears of pure rage running down my face without permission, each drop a physical manifestation of the indignation consuming me like an internal fire. During the following hour, which passed like a century of increasingly disturbing revelations, Solange revealed details that made me realize that what I had discovered was just the tip of a manipulation iceberg that had been built over years, not months. She had planned and executed the Gabriel Martinez farce with a meticulousness that demonstrated months of careful preparation an obsessive study of my habits and romantic preferences that she had cataloged like a behavioral scientist, obsessed with a project consuming all her thoughts and free energy. She had created not just the initial profile on the dating apps I frequented, but an entire fictional universe complete with detailed professional background, researched on architecture-specialized websites, invented family with specific names, ages, and personalities she could cite when necessary, musical and cinematic tastes mathematically calculated to attract me based on years of observing my entertainment patterns, and even a carefully constructed traumatic romantic past that explained why he was so cautious with relationships, and that was specifically designed to create empathy and deep emotional connection with me. I spent weeks meticulously observing what kind of man you always looked for in your romantic endeavors, what physical characteristics made you instantly interested in someone, what personalities managed to keep your attention for more than a few weeks, what things you always complained about regarding your previous boyfriends during our weekly phone conversations. She confessed with frightening naturalness, as if describing an elaborate decoration project, and not a psychological manipulation scheme that violated all basic laws of family respect and consent. Her words flowed with a fluidity that showed she had thought about this plan for a very long time, possibly years, waiting for the right moment to implement it when I was sufficiently vulnerable and desperate for romantic companionship. Solange had even hired a friend with a deep and seductive voice to record audio messages when she couldn't sufficiently disguise her own voice during longer calls. Paying 200 reais per month for this man to create personalized romantic content based on detailed scripts that she wrote like a professional screenwriter creating dialogues for fictional characters. You talked for endless hours. How did you manage to maintain a completely different personality for so long without contradicting yourself or breaking character? I asked, genuinely curious about the logistics of the lie that had consumed a significant part of her life for 6 months, transforming her into a full-time actress playing a role that required impressive emotional consistency and technique. I created detailed reminders on my phone about things Gabriel had supposedly lived, or felt, kept a detailed physical diary of his personality with characteristics, likes, dislikes, and emotional reactions to avoid contradicting myself during long conversations, and even studied architecture in free online courses offered by prestigious universities to be able to sustain convincing and technically accurate conversations about his work that impressed you with specific knowledge of the field, she replied with a sick pride in her voice, demonstrating a level of dedication to the lie that was simultaneously impressive and terrifying, like a work of art created by a talented psychopath. The most shocking and disturbing moment of the confession came when Solange admitted, looking at the floor with what seemed to be genuine shame for the first time since I had arrived, that she had begun to feel genuinely emotionally connected to the version of herself that portrayed Gabriel, reaching the psychologically sick point of developing confused and inappropriate feelings toward her own daughter through the male persona she had meticulously created. Sometimes, especially during the nights when I was writing his most intimate romantic messages, I felt as if I was really in love with you in a way that transcended normal maternal love, but not as a protective mother, as a woman romantically desiring another woman, she confessed, her words coming out in embarrassed whispers that made me feel such intense nausea that I had to run to the family bathroom where I had learned to brush my teeth and bathe as a child. I violently threw up my breakfast and everything that was in my stomach, clinging to the cold porcelain of the toilet while my mind tried to process the absolutely sick psychological complexity of the situation that had involved me without my knowledge or consent for half a year of my adult life. My own mother had developed a romantic attraction to her own daughter through a fictional male persona. It was a level of psychological disturbance that I wasn't sure could be treated or cured by any therapy known to modern psychology or traditional psychiatry. The family bathroom, with its light blue walls and mirror where I had watched myself grow from childhood to adolescence, now seemed like a horror movie setting where horrible discoveries happened in seemingly safe and familiar places. When I returned to the living room with shaky legs and a pale face, Solange was crying silently, her tears seeming genuine for the first time since I had arrived at the house to confront her about her emotional crimes. Marina, my daughter, I know I did something unforgivable that goes beyond any normal maternal mistake. I completely lost control of the situation and no longer knew how to stop without hurting you even more than I was already secretly doing, she said with a broken voice that almost made me feel sorry for her, until I remembered that she had spent 6 entire months lying to me every day with a dedication that bordered on pathological obsession. You didn't stop because you didn't want to stop. You were sadistically enjoying the absolute power of controlling my feelings, of being the perfect person for me through an elaborate lie that kept me emotionally dependent on someone who didn't exist. I accused with a mental clarity that contrasted with the emotional chaos dominating my heart, realizing that part of her satisfaction came exactly from the total control she exercised over my emotional life through the most sophisticated manipulation I could imagine. The conversation continued for 2 more painful and revealing hours, during which I discovered that Solange had planned to continue the farce indefinitely, perhaps for years or decades, possibly creating some kind of gradual fictional tragedy that would explain why Gabriel would have to slowly distance himself from my life, allowing her to maintain control over my future relationships through the idealized memory of the perfect man that no real human being could surpass. You were planning to keep me emotionally tied to a ghost for the rest of my life to ensure that I never found someone real who could give me genuine love and take me away from your obsessive maternal influence. I realized with growing horror that made me feel claustrophobic in the room where I had spent so many happy moments of childhood, understanding that her plan was much more sinister and long-term than a simple temporary lie. Solange confirmed my worst suspicions with an embarrassed nod, admitting that she couldn't bear the idea of seeing me with a real man who could emotionally distance me from her, or who might not treat me the way she thought I deserved, according to her unrealistic standards about perfect relationships. It was a distorted maternal jealousy that had transformed into an obsession of total control over my intimate life, using methods that bordered on criminal in their psychological sophistication and calculated emotional cruelty. You need urgent professional psychological help, Solange. What you did is not only morally wrong, it's sick on a level that frightens anyone with basic notions of mental health, I finally said, realizing that I was dealing with someone who had mental problems much deeper and more complex than I had perceived during all the years we lived together as seemingly normal mother and daughter. The woman sitting in the floral armchair across from me wasn't the loving mother I thought I knew intimately, but a stranger with serious personality disorders who had used our family relationship as a laboratory to satisfy sick psychological needs that I didn't even know existed in the spectrum of possible human behaviors. I'm leaving now, and I don't want any more contact with you until you seek serious treatment and prove through years of therapy that you've completely changed your way of relating to other people, I announced, rising from the chair with a dignity I didn't know I still possessed after everything I had discovered on that terrible day that had forever changed my perception of family and maternal love. Leaving Solange's house was like escaping from a psychological prison, where I had been kept emotionally captive without knowing for years, breathing fresh air for the first time in an eternity, as I walked through the garden that now seemed to belong to someone else in another universe where the basic laws of family decency hadn't been violated in such an elaborate and cruel manner. During the journey back to my apartment, with hands still trembling on the steering wheel and heart beating at a speed that seemed harmful to health, I called Amanda, my best friend since college, who was a psychologist and would certainly have profound insights about the bizarre situation I had just discovered and confronted. Amanda, you won't believe what just happened to me today. My mother created a fake boyfriend and spent 6 months deceiving me through psychological manipulation that seems straight out of a horror movie, I said as soon as she answered, my voice still shaking with recent shock and disbelief about my own life having become an impossible scenario to believe. Amanda remained silent for a few seconds that seemed like hours, probably processing the strangeness of the situation and calibrating her professional response, before answering with her voice that mixed personal concern with technical knowledge. Marina, this is extremely serious and concerning. What your mother did has clear characteristics of psychological abuse and emotional manipulation at levels that can cause lasting trauma and affect your ability to form healthy relationships in the future. During the next 40 minutes, as I drove through the increasingly familiar streets that led me back home and to some kind of normality after the most bizarre day of my life, Amanda helped me understand the psychological implications of what had happened, explaining with professional clarity how manipulation of this magnitude and sophistication could permanently affect my future ability to form healthy relationships and trust other people without constantly suspecting hidden motives. You need to seek therapy immediately, Marina. This type of family betrayal can create deep problems of trust and intimacy that go far beyond the relationship with your mother and can contaminate all your future relationships if not properly treated, she advised with the seriousness of someone who understood the psychological gravity of the situation. And I knew she was right because I could already feel my mind questioning the authenticity of every person I knew. The wound that Solange had opened in my capacity to love and be loved was much deeper than any normal relationship breakup, because it involved the systematic destruction of trust in the person who should have been my foundation of emotional security in life. The maternal anchor that should protect me from manipulators, not be the greatest manipulator of all. Dr. Pereira, the psychologist whom Amanda enthusiastically recommended based on years of professional experience working with complex cases of family trauma, was a dark-haired 48-year-old man with a calm presence that radiated professional competence and brown eyes that conveyed experience accumulated through decades of dealing with the darkest complexities of the human psyche and the deepest traumas that families can inflict on each other. During our first session, scheduled for the next day because Amanda personally called explaining the urgency of the situation and the need for immediate psychological intervention, he listened to my story with a facial expression that mixed genuine professional concern with visible surprise at the cruel creativity of the manipulation I had suffered at the hands of someone who should have protected me. In 25 years of career dealing with the most complex cases of family abuse and psychological manipulation, I have never seen a case exactly like yours, Marina. The meticulous level of planning and the obsessive dedication that your mother invested in this elaborate farce indicates a very specific and concerning personality disorder that needs to be treated by specialists in antisocial behaviors and control disorders, he said after patiently listening to every detail of Solange's confession without interrupting me or showing judgment, taking detailed notes in a notebook that seemed to contain the darkest secrets of human nature. Dr. Pereira explained with technical clarity that her behavior had clear characteristics of borderline personality disorder mixed with obsessive controlling tendencies and possible narcissistic traits, creating a dangerous psychological combination that could manifest in other elaborate forms of manipulation if not properly treated by professionals specialized in complex personality disorders. The most concerning and clinically significant aspect is that she developed romantic feelings for you through the fictitious male persona. This suggests serious problems with identity and boundaries that go far beyond normal maternal jealousy and enter the territory of dissociative disorders. He analyzed, confirming my worst fears about the depth of Solange's psychological problems and the possibility that other similar behaviors had gone unnoticed over the years. During the weekly sessions that followed, we worked together methodically to rebuild my ability to trust in genuine relationships, identifying specific behavior patterns that I should observe to avoid manipulators in the future, developing practical strategies to deal with the specific trauma of having been deceived by the person who should protect me from any harm, and creating psychological tools to distinguish between genuine affection and calculated manipulation. The most important thing now is for you to deeply understand that not all affection is disguised manipulation. Not every caring person is lying to you or has hidden motives. Dr. Pereira would repeat with infinite patience whenever I showed excessive paranoia about other people's intentions, or when I obsessively questioned the authenticity of every affectionate gesture I received. 3 months after discovering the Gabriel Martinez farce, my life had become a complex emotional roller coaster of personal reconstruction that violently oscillated between moments of intense anger toward Solange that made me want to scream until I lost my voice, and periods of deep melancholic sadness for the irreversible loss of the mother I thought I had for 35 years of apparently normal family relationship. Amanda became my anchor of sanity during this turbulent and confusing period, visiting me regularly with the dedication of a chosen sister, and helping me navigate the emotional complexities of permanently cutting contact with a manipulative family member who knew each of my vulnerabilities and knew exactly how to hurt me if she wanted to. You cannot feel guilty for protecting your mental health. Marina, what your mother did has no justification in any circumstance known to psychology or basic ethics of family relationships. She would remind me with maternal firmness whenever I began to question if I was being too cruel by refusing any communication with Solange, or when I felt waves of guilt for abandoning someone who had raised me and supposedly loved me for decades. During this period of self-imposed isolation and emotional healing, Solange tried multiple desperate forms of contact, incessant calls that came at calculated times to catch me vulnerable which I didn't answer, dramatic WhatsApp messages that alternated between pleas for forgiveness and veiled threats that I deleted without reading to protect my mental peace, and even surprise appearances at my building that forced me to ask the doorman for help to prevent her from coming up to my apartment and invading my safe space. Each of her contact attempts was like coarse salt on an open wound, constantly reminding me of the profound betrayal and making the emotional healing process I was trying to conduct with Dr. Pereira's specialized help and Amanda's unconditional support more difficult. She is demonstrating typical patterns of people with personality disorders, who do not accept responsibility for their destructive actions. The obsessive insistence on maintaining contact despite your clear and repeated boundaries is another form of control and manipulation, explained my psychologist when I reported the invasive communication attempts that seemed designed to break me psychologically. It was during one of these revealing therapy sessions that I made the crucial decision to seek legal help to formalize my need for space and protection against Solange's obsessive behavior that was preventing my emotional recovery. Officer Santos was an experienced 45-year-old woman with gray hair tied in a practical bun that demonstrated years of dedicated public service, who received me with genuine professional seriousness when I went to the police station to file a formal complaint about Solange's behavior and request a legal protective measure that would prevent her from approaching me physically or digitally. Although the case is unusual in its sophistication and cruel creativity, what your mother did constitutes the crime of false identity according to the Penal Code, in addition to characterizing persecution and stalking when she insists on maintaining contact against your express will, explained the officer after hearing my complete story and meticulously examining the evidence I had collected and organized. Screenshots of conversations with Gabriel that showed the pattern of manipulation, records of Solange's contact attempts after my request for distance, and detailed psychological reports from Dr. Pereira attesting to the significant trauma I had suffered. During the official investigation that followed, conducted with professionalism that positively surprised me, we discovered that Solange had used false identities on multiple online platforms, not only to create Gabriel, but also to obsessively monitor my activity on social networks through fictitious profiles that she had added to my friends lists without my knowledge, creating a digital surveillance network that had lasted for years. Roberto, the digital investigator assigned to the case, was a 41-year-old specialist with modern glasses and impressive technical knowledge who methodically tracked all of Solange's online activity, revealing a disturbing pattern of obsessive surveillance that had lasted much longer than I imagined, and included systematic monitoring of my previous relationships through fake profiles. She used to infiltrate my ex-boyfriend's social circles and collect detailed information about our intimate life. Your mother had at least 8 different profiles on various social networks, all created specifically to watch you without your knowledge or consent over several years, Roberto revealed during our formal meeting at the police station, showing printed digital evidence that made me realize my privacy had been violated in ways I never imagined were possible or legal in the modern internet world. Carlos, my ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago with whom I had ended on friendly terms, was contacted during the investigation and confirmed that he had received friendship requests from unknown women who asked many seemingly casual questions about our relationship, always in a friendly and curious manner that didn't raise suspicions. She knew intimate details about relationships I never directly shared with her. Now I perfectly understand how she obtained this private information to use in building the perfect Gabriel, I muttered with growing disgust, feeling a new wave of violation upon realizing the abysmal depth of the invasion I had suffered for years without noticing. The investigation revealed that Solange had begun this obsessive surveillance since I turned 18 and started dating seriously, creating a detailed mental file on every man who approached me, their specific personalities, particular flaws and virtues that I valued, to eventually use this information in the meticulous creation of the perfect man that would be Gabriel Martinez. It was a level of planning and obsession that bordered on clinical psychopathy, demonstrating that the Gabriel episode had not been a momentary impulse of excessive maternal control, but the calculated culmination of decades of invasive and manipulative behavior that had completely gone unnoticed by my filial naivety. Solange's trial took place 6 months after the discovery of the deception, in a small and austere courtroom that seemed inadequate to judge such a psychologically complex and emotionally devastating crime, with its walls painted in institutional beige and dark wooden furniture that gave the environment a sobriety that contrasted with the surreal bizarreness of the case being judged. She arrived at the court accompanied by an expensive criminal lawyer who had been hired with money she probably should have spent on therapy years ago, wearing a conservative navy blue suit that made her look like a respectable lady and an expression of misunderstood victim that made me feel violent nausea as I recognized another elaborate layer of manipulation now directed at the judicial system that would decide her fate. During her testimony, which lasted almost 2 hours of theatrical performance alternating between calculated tears and feigned indignation, Solange tried to minimize her acts as excesses of genuine maternal love and legitimate concern for her only daughter's happiness. but the prosecutor had meticulously prepared and presented irrefutable digital evidence of the systematic planning and deliberately criminal nature of her actions throughout years of obsessive surveillance. The defendant not only created an elaborate false identity to emotionally deceive the victim, but maintained obsessive surveillance for years, systematically violating the privacy and autonomy of her own daughter through methods that demonstrate premeditation and knowledge of the illegality of her acts, stated the prosecutor during his final argument that echoed through the silent room where each word weighed like evidence of a cruelty that transcended normal family boundaries. The most difficult and emotionally devastating moment of the trial was when I was called to testify about the psychological impact the deception had caused in my life, forcing me to publicly report intimate details about how the betrayal had profoundly affected my ability to trust in future relationships and my fundamental perception about the nature of family love. Looking directly at Solange in the dock while methodically describing my emotional pain was simultaneously liberating and devastating. Liberating because I was finally having an official voice about what I had suffered. Devastating because it definitively confirmed that the woman who gave birth to me was a dangerous stranger from whom I needed to legally protect myself to preserve my mental sanity. She not only stole 6 months of my life with elaborate lies, but also my ability to believe in genuine love and the basic honesty of human relationships. I declared during my testimony that was recorded for judicial records, feeling hot tears running down my face while the judge and jurors silently absorbed the gravity of the emotional crime that had been committed against me by someone who should have been my greatest protector. The final sentence was more severe than I expected, demonstrating that the judicial system took seriously the psychological complexity of the case. 2 years of semi-open prison for ideological falsehood, stalking and systematic privacy violation, plus 5 years of total prohibition of any kind of contact with me, and mandatory continued psychiatric treatment with professionals specialized in personality disorders. The gravity of the crimes committed by the defendant lies not only in the technical illegality of the acts, but in the profound and calculated violation of family trust, and the psychological cruelty demonstrated over a prolonged period against a vulnerable victim, declared the judge when announcing the decision that echoed through the room like a hammer of justice finally striking. Solange received the sentence with an expression of genuine shock that seemed real for the first time in months, as if she truly didn't understand that her actions had serious legal consequences in the real world beyond the emotional consequences she had caused, and tried to look me in the eyes one last time before being escorted by court officers. But I kept my gaze fixed on the polished marble floor, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a final moment of visual connection that she might interpret as future forgiveness or possibility of family reconciliation that would never happen. Leaving the courthouse was like breathing fresh air for the first time in months, knowing that there was finally formal legal justice to accompany the emotional healing process that was still ongoing with Dr. Pereira. Amanda was waiting for me outside with a warm hug and tears in her eyes that mixed relief and sadness, sharing my complex feeling of relief mixed with melancholy for the complete and irreversible destruction of a family relationship that was once important to my development as a person. 2 years after the revelation of the Gabriel Martinez farce, my life had transformed into a stronger and wiser version of who I was before the betrayal, proving that it's possible to completely rebuild yourself after devastating family traumas when you have adequate support, iron determination to heal, and enough time to process the emotional complexity of what happened. It was during a book launch event that Amanda had convinced me to attend in a small and cozy bookstore downtown that I met Eduardo, a 36-year-old literature professor who approached me in a completely transparent and respectful manner, without psychological games or attempts to impress through elaborate stories that could be fabricated. Our first conversation lasted a natural 3 hours that passed like minutes, during which he showed genuine intellectual interest in my thoughts about the books we were discussing, without making any calculated attempt to impress me with elaborate personal stories or an artificial personality constructed to please me. There's something refreshingly honest about the way he talks about himself, including his human flaws and normal insecurities, I commented to Dr. Pereira after our first real date, realizing that authenticity had become my most valued quality in any person, more important than beauty, success, or superficial charm. Eduardo knew about my traumatic history with Solange from the beginning of our relationship. I had learned through therapy that hiding past traumas only created weak foundations for future relationships, and he reacted with genuine compassion and admirable patience when I explained in detail why I needed more time to completely trust his intentions and feelings. During our first months together, He voluntarily showed me his phone when I became anxious about messages he received, introduced me to friends and family without hesitation or attempts to control narratives, and never showed irritation when I asked direct questions about his intentions or when I investigated aspects of his life that could be independently verified. I prefer that you question me openly and feel secure rather than pretend to have confidence that doesn't yet come naturally, he told me one night when I was particularly anxious about the authenticity of his feelings, demonstrating an emotional maturity that dramatically contrasted with the sophisticated manipulation I had suffered. This total transparency and willingness to be vulnerable helped me clearly distinguish between genuine love and calculated manipulation, teaching me that healthy relationships thrive with complete honesty and open communication, not with mystery or psychological games that keep a person emotionally dependent. Eduardo never tried to be perfect or artificially agree with everything I said. He had his own well-formed opinions, tastes different from mine in various cultural areas, and an independent personality that didn't artificially mold itself to please me. Characteristics that initially made me nervous, but that I gradually learned to value as unmistakable signs of real human authenticity. The decision to marry Eduardo came after 2 years of dating, during which he consistently proved to be exactly who he said he was, without unpleasant surprises or revelations of hidden personalities that could echo the trauma I had suffered with Solange. Our ceremony was small and intimate, only with close friends who had witnessed my recovery journey and his family members who welcomed me as a daughter without questioning my decision not to have maternal family present. Amanda was my maid of honor. Dr. Pereira was our guest of honor, representing the importance of mental health in building healthy relationships. And even Roberto, the digital investigator, attended to celebrate how my life had been positively rebuilt after past traumas that had been overcome through dedicated therapeutic work and genuine relationships. 5 years after the Gabriel Martinez episode, my life had transformed into a stronger and wiser version of who I was before the betrayal, definitively proving that it's possible to completely rebuild yourself after devastating family traumas when you have adequate support, determination to heal, and enough time to process the emotional complexity of what happened. Eduardo and I had our first daughter, Isabella, a healthy and cheerful girl who taught me dimensions of maternal love that were completely different from the unhealthy obsession that Solange had demonstrated through her elaborate manipulation. True love between mother and daughter means wanting your child to grow independent and capable of forming her own healthy relationships based on free choice, I said to Dr. Pereira during one of our occasional psychological maintenance sessions that we kept to ensure my continued emotional stability. Watching Isabella grow and develop her own unique personality made me understand even more deeply how Solange's behavior had been unnatural and destructive. A psychologically healthy mother celebrates her daughter's growing independence, not tries to control it through sophisticated psychological manipulation and systematic invasion of privacy. My volunteer work with victims of family abuse expanded to include lectures at universities about signs of psychological manipulation in family relationships, helping other young adults identify toxic behaviors before they cause lasting trauma that requires years of therapy to overcome. Your story saved my relationship with my own mother, a student told me after one of these educational lectures, because I recognized similar patterns of obsessive control and sought family therapy before the situation escalated to irreversible levels. Knowing that my terrible experience was being transformed into protection for other people gave me a sense of purpose that completely transformed my perspective on the trauma I had suffered, converting a destructive experience into strength to help others in similar situations. During this entire period of reconstruction and personal growth, Solange remained completely absent from my life as determined by the court, and I never missed her presence or felt curiosity about how she was recovering in prison and later on parole. Some people are too toxic to deserve second chances, regardless of the biological ties that may exist. I always explain to people who question my decision to permanently cut contact with my biological mother. Forgiveness, I learned through intensive therapy, does not require reconciliation. I can forgive Solange for my own psychological well-being without needing to allow her back into my life or my daughter's life. Isabella will grow up knowing only her paternal grandmother, who is a loving and psychologically healthy woman who understands appropriate boundaries between generations, demonstrating to my daughter how genuinely healthy family relationships really work without manipulation or obsessive control. This is my final victory against Solange. I think whenever I see my daughter playing freely, without fear that her feelings are being manipulated or controlled by adults who should protect her unconditionally. My story with Gabriel Martinez has become a closed chapter that taught me valuable lessons about trust, authenticity, and the importance of carefully choosing the people we allow into our intimate lives. This is my story of how I discovered that my own mother was capable of extreme psychological manipulation, but also of how I transformed this devastating discovery into a journey of personal growth and building genuinely healthy relationships based on mutual honesty. For anyone facing family manipulation or questioning the authenticity of relationships in their life, I want you to know that it is possible to fully recover and build a life based on true love and mutual honesty when you have the courage to face the truth and seek appropriate help. Solange may have tried to teach me that love means control and manipulation, but Isabella is learning that true love means freedom to grow, make mistakes, learn, and form independent relationships based on personal choice and genuine affinity. Sometimes, I reflect while watching my daughter sleep peacefully. The worst betrayals teach us the most valuable lessons about how to love in a healthy and authentic way, transforming pain into wisdom and trauma into strength to protect future generations. Did you like Marina's story and her journey of discovery, trauma, and recovery? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.